It's week one of the playoffs, so nailing those start-sit decisions has never been more important. We have got you covered with the wide receiver ranks and tiers you need to make sure you set those lineups correctly. Let's kick it off with the S tier. Jaxon, Smith-Njigba, Jamar Chase, Puka Nacua, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Puka Nacua had one hell of a game last week. Some of the best catches you will see in the NFL this year. And he did all of that whilst playing only 44% of snaps. Can he continue to run this pure on this few amount of snaps? Or is there potential that it could come with a residing dud this week?
Look, I mean, we've joked about Puka Nacua being taken off the field. We've joked about Puka Nacua's not scoring touchdowns. And last week I pointed to the fact that his numbers against two high safeties weren't particularly strong. And what does he do? He goes out there and puts up the second most receiving yards of his career with 167. It was the seventh time he's been over 160 yards, I think, in his career now. And he scores two touchdowns, multiple touchdowns for the first time ever in his career. So it's really nice to see Puka Nacua breaking against some of those trends. And I think this is going to be a fantastic week for him because the Lions lead the league in man coverage, which Puka's been very good against. And they're fifth in single high safety looks. Now, when it comes to single high safety looks, Puka Nacua is the only player in the league who's played on, I think, run more than 50 routes against single high coverage and averages over 4 yards per route run. He's at 4.68. It's just an absurd number and absurd efficiency. And I think he's going to have a great game again. But would it surprise me to see him go out there and limp towards 100 receiving yards and not get a touchdown? No. But I have every confidence in him that it's a good enough matchup that we shouldn't be worried about it.
And in that same matchup, we've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, obviously playing with the ankle injury. Was clearly laboring a bit last week, but I thought played really impressive, still got open consistently, and the volume was there, seeing 9 targets. Are you comfortable slotting him as your wide receiver 1 this week?
Yeah, I am. And obviously had the extra couple of days to get healthy as well, having gone from playing on the Thursday night. So I think that is definitely a little arrow up for him. And ultimately, when Amon-Ra's out there, like the volume is just going to go to him so often. I think that it's not an easy matchup with the Rams being one of the better pass defenses in the league. And they're also pretty good against the slot. They've allowed the seventh lowest catch rate there. But they've also allowed 9 touchdowns to slot receivers this year, which is one of the higher numbers. So for every argument I can make against Amon-Ra St. Brown, there's a counter argument, and also just that factor of he's just really damn good. And every year people have kind of said, well, maybe volume disappears. What's it going to look like when the volume disappears? Well, he's 1 touchdown away from having double-digit touchdowns in 3 straight seasons, and 24 yards away from his 5th straight season with 1,000 yards. Like I'm not doubting Amon-Ra.
5 straight seasons with 1,000 yards. That's Hall of Fame worthy, I hear. Moving into the A tier, we've got Rashee Rice, AJ Brown, George Pickens, Devontae Adams, Nico Collins, CeeDee Lamb, and Jaylen Waddle. AJ Brown has been really, really impressive over the last 3 weeks from a fantasy perspective, but on the field, he's making massive errors. I think this offense fails to function when they're forcing the ball to AJ Brown, but for fantasy, happy days because the volume's there.
Well, mostly. I mean, like the drop last week was egregious and definitely would have made life a lot better for him if he'd caught that, obviously. But he's had 3 finishes outside the top 15 wide receivers in his last 5 games. But the target share is ridiculous, as you point to. Like 3 games over a 32% target share in his last 4 games since the bye week. So it's clear that the Eagles are starting to say, look, we've just got to keep AJ Brown happy. And it's kind of come at the detriment of Devonta Smith, who's been a little less involved in recent weeks. Now, this week, going up against the Raiders, they've allowed the 14th most schedule adjusted fantasy points to the wide receiver position. They rank 18th against the pass in EPA allowed. I think this is just going to be one of those games where the Eagles, who are feeling a little downtrodden, are going to go in and really try to make a statement game because they've got it. Like 8-5 isn't good enough for a team coming off a Super Bowl.
And then also in this tier, we have got CeeDee Lamb, who we disagree on slightly this week. You have got him ranked all the way up at wide receiver 6. I've got him down at wide receiver 12. So I guess the question is, are you too high or am I too low?
Well, you're too low, obviously. So over his last 3 games, he's had 17.6 PPR points, 11.5, 24.2, and 18.1. He's been over 100 yards in consecutive games. And him and George Pickens since week 7 have an identical target share of 24.3%. The Vikings, like their defense has been a little bit more up and down. Yes, on the course of the season, they've allowed the 9th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver position. But I think this is strength on strength. I think the Cowboys are going to go into this game ready to pass the ball a lot. And I was a little surprised to see you'd ranked Pickens ahead of CeeDee Lamb this week.
I think this is just a potentially a styles make fights thing. I think that the Cowboys will look to push the ball outside. I think the Vikings, they like to confuse things through the middle. We're not quite sure who's coming. And I just wonder if we're going to see, let's not Dak have to work through stuff. Let's not make it complicated. Let's drop back and push the ball outside where we know George Pickens can win one-on-one. I think we're going to see maybe I'm getting too in the weeds, a lot of X-ISO, him on the, the one side of the field, 3 wide receivers or maybe the tight end over to the other and just saying, look, George Pickens, you win one-on-one. You had a bit of a strop last week. We're going to force feed you the ball this week. And that's why I guess I'm probably higher on George Pickens than CeeDee Lamb.
I don't know. I think, you make valid points, but I just, when I was putting my rankings together, I couldn't find any reasons to knock CeeDee Lamb. And with the extra couple of days to recover from concussion, I think it's going to be a good both him and Pickens.
One person we do agree on this week, though, Jaylen Waddle. We've both got him. Well, I've got him 10. You've got him 11. It feels like there is enough volume in this offense when it's all going to him that he can continue to get home.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like Jaylen Waddle said, 6+ targets in each of his last 6 games. There's a 25% target share since week 7. Nobody else on the Dolphins, like wide receivers or tight ends, is over a 15% mark. 9.4 yards per target is really strong. And going up against the Steelers defense, who ranks 6th in fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position, they have been very poor all year. Jalen Ramsey looks just like a shell of himself at the minute. All he's got left is just smacking players around after the play's over. And I think that Jaylen Waddle's kind of on track to have maybe, if not the best year of his career, because his rookie year was incredibly special, then easily the 2nd best year of his career so far.
And then before we move into the B tier, if you are finding this for the first time, 70% of people watching this video haven't yet hit the subscribe button. So go ahead and do that now. We promise you will not regret it. In the B tier, we've got Michael Wilson, Terry McLaurin, Zay Flowers, Chris Olave, Wan'Dale Robinson, Tatara McMillan, Justin Jefferson, Jameson Williams, Devonta Smith, and Jakobi Meyers. Tom, I feel like we have to start at the top. Michael Wilson, who saw this coming? Who expected this? When Marvin Harrison is not in the lineup, he has performed as the wide receiver 5 overall. When Marvin Harrison has been in the lineup, he has been outside the top 70 wide receivers. Do you think that no Marvin Harrison, Michael Wilson is just an absolute superstar?
Yeah, well, he is. I mean, in those 3 games about Marvin Harrison, he's averaging 30 PPR points per game, plays on 84% of routes, 34% of targets, and 195 air yards per game in those ones. So, yeah, just an absolute stud. Whether we see Marvin Harrison this week or not remains to be seen. The matchup, though, is not a great matchup going up against the Texans, who've allowed the 4th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver position. They rank number 1 in EPA pass defense. So all the Cardinals this week are just getting knocked slightly because of that matchup. And just because, even though it's been good, I just don't think the Cardinals are a good enough team where I fancy them in these matchups.
Yeah, it does feel like this game could get out of hand very quickly. And whilst sometimes that's good for garbage time, I think this defense is good enough that they can take that garbage time away and it just end up as a bit of a dud. Chris Olave was a player that was basically a PPR scam, was just seeing insane volume, expected to average over 200 targets based on the pace he was on earlier in the year. Yet last week, only saw 5 targets. Tyler Shuck using his legs a little bit more. Do we expect the volume to come back, or could it be another tough week where we see below 5-6 targets?
Well, the Panthers, their defense, they're a reasonable unit. They don't pop out particularly in any particular metric, but they have a habit of doing okay against these teams. Like the secondary is reasonable. And Olave, we're probably talking across these videos far more about Saints players than any other team, because there is some value there. They are fun players, but Olave's not been a top 15 wide receiver in 3 straight games. He's not caught more than 4 targets in his last 2. And he's not been over 50 receiving yards in either of those last 2. So the wheels are slightly coming off Chris Olave. I think if you've got him, I don't feel horrendous about starting him. I just think sometimes you just have to adjust your expectations on these players. And maybe, both of us have got him ranked between wide receiver 14 and wide receiver 17. Maybe he should be closer to 20.
Also in this tier round now, we've got Jakobi Meyers, who since he was traded to the Jaguars is the wide receiver 12 overall. Yes, that's buoyed by the fact that he's played in all 5 of those games rather than there be bye weeks, but he has been a solid, reliable, usable weapon, and he's changed this offense because he is that solid, reliable, usable weapon. Do you just think plug and play wide receiver 2 from here for the rest of the season?
Yeah, and the Jets, who they play against, haven't given up loads of wide receiver fantasy points, but I don't think, they're not a matchup that we need to worry about in the same way they were when Sauce Gardner was there. But the volume's just ridiculous for Jakobi Meyers. 10 targets last week, did only catch 4 of them for 39 yards. But multiple touchdowns since he got to the Jags. He's frequently up at the top of first read target share across the weeks. Brian Thomas is not somebody that I'm particularly concerned about. I'm not sure if Parker Washington's going to play this week, but I think that Jakobi Meyers was somebody they felt the need for, and he's come in and been exactly what they expected.
We're going to move into the C tier now. We do have Stephon Diggs, DK Metcalf, Juwan Jennings, Emeka Egbuka, Chris Godwin, Christian Watson, Deebo Samuel, Lad McConkey, Courtland Sutton, and Brian Thomas. DK Metcalf got home last week, but that is the first time he has broken 15 fantasy points since week 8. So is this another good DK Metcalf week, or are we expecting more of the same as he has been for most of the season?
Yeah, it's definitely difficult to know what you're going to get from anybody in the Arthur Smith, Aaron Rodgers offense, because from the get-go, they clearly had seen a weakness on the Ravens, and that was going to be how they were going to try and get the Ravens, the big 50-yard passing play straight from the jump. And Aaron Rodgers had 4 completions of 20-plus air yards against the Ravens. Weeks 1 to 13, he'd only had 7, but he hadn't had a single one since week 8. That's not how the Steelers are typically going to play. Maybe they are experiencing some kind of philosophical shift right now, and they're going to transition into that. But I don't feel like it's necessarily something which is going to be a way that you can get at teams every single week. Like the Dolphins, their pass defense has been pretty reasonable against deep ball this year. I mean, that Jalen Ramsey, Minkah Fitzpatrick trade, you look at the numbers, and Minkah Fitzpatrick has played far better than Jalen Ramsey across the course of the season. So I don't think that they're necessarily going to give up a huge amount of plays there. They've only allowed 3 receptions of 20-plus yards all season. So to suddenly expect that to be the way that the Steelers are going to play, I'm not sure about it. And when DK's not getting vertical, it doesn't tend to work out as well for him.
2 shots at Jalen Ramsey in 1 wide receiver video. That is why you come to the Fantasy Sanctuary. One player that I am consistently struggling ranking with week in, week out is Lad McConkey. I was convinced last week that with the offensive line issues in Los Angeles, they were going to get the ball out quick and it was going to see an increase in production from Ladd McConkey. Well, he led all Chargers skill position players in snap share, route share, target share, and finished with 2.2 fantasy points. Do you have any more faith that Ladd can produce this week?
Well, it should be pointed out the Eagles are by far the best team in the league against slot receivers, and it's not even close. Like they allow like a 46% completion rate to the slot, whereas the next nearest is like 59%. But it is slightly concerning that over the last 3 games, McConkey's been wide receiver 65, 20, and 84. He's not been over 40 yards in any of them. So there's part of me that worries slightly. Now, the Chargers going up against the Chiefs are really susceptible to play action. They're really susceptible to plays with motion. We do see Ladd McConkey used in motion at times. So maybe things open up. But I think that it's reflective of where we've got him. Like you're talking low-end wide receiver 2, flex play, rather than where you drafted him, which was to be a top 12 wide receiver.
Before we dive into the D tier, though, make sure you are diving in those comments. Let us know your thoughts, but also if you've got any start-sit decisions, if you're agonizing over that final flex spots, get it in the comments. Tom and I will give you our thoughts and our opinions. In the D tier, we do have Michael Pittman, Khalil Shakir, Luther Burden, Jayden Reed, Alec Pierce, Jerry Jeudy, and Jordan Addison. Luther Burden is a player that I have talked up on a couple of buy sells videos this year, including this week's. I thought he looked awesome last week. I think he's going to earn more snap share and potentially overtake DJ Moore. Do you think there could be some sneaky upside if you're looking for a dart throw and potentially a matchup that you need more points?
Well, it was frustrating, though, to see him not the wide receiver 2. The wide receiver 2 role still seemed to be Olamide Zaccheaus, which I didn't necessarily see coming. But I think the fact that he did lead the team in target share, had 6 targets, 4 catches, and 70 yards, kind of made up for it. It's just still wanting to see him be unleashed all the way. Now, going up against the Browns isn't necessarily an easy matchup. They play the most single high coverage in the league, though, which Luther Burden has 3.06 yards per route run against. Like, he is by far their best option against that coverage on the team. If there's no Rome Odunze because of his stress fracture, then I think that very much continues to try and clear a path for him. But I don't view it as a high ceiling player. I just view it as kind of like fine.
One player that I didn't think I'd have to talk about again all year was Jerry Jeudy, but you stuck a note saying you wanted to discuss Jerry Jeudy this week. So, Tom, the floor is yours.
Well, look, I know that you're down on Shedeur Sanders. I know that you're down on Jerry Jeudy, but like last week, Shedeur Sanders was the QB2 on the week. He passed for 364 yards and 3 touchdowns. And not many teams have done that on the Titans. Now, the Titans, I'm not saying they're a great defense or anything, but they've managed to keep games under control at points, or teams have got up enough early on where they didn't need to. And for whatever reason, last week the Browns went to town with passing. We've seen Shedeur Sanders be aggressive with both several weeks straight. Things seem to be clicking a little more with him and Jerry Jeudy as time goes on. And the Bears have allowed the second most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. They've been beaten up across their entire defense all year. They are not a good unit. And I think that it's just it's worth considering the fact that Jerry Jeudy could have a good week this week. I know that everybody's enamored with Harold Fannin, who's been excellent. But Jerry Jeudy in his own right, like 16.6 fantasy points last week. That was his second double-digit fantasy game within the last 5, so it's not been plentiful. But I think that the matchup's fine, and I think that Shedeur Sanders has shown enough where I trust Jerry Jeudy as probably a wide receiver 4 in a deeper flex league rather than in a traditional start 2 or 3 wide receivers.
And then in the E tier, we have got Quentin Johnson, Xavier Worthy, and Jayden Higgins. I've tried to hype up Jayden Higgins a few times this year, but I truly believe it is coming. 32% targets per route run last week. It feels like the Texans are starting to integrate more and starting to force the ball his way. Do you think there's some hope there, or maybe getting ahead of my skis a little?
Well, I think it's clear that he's the wide receiver too. Like you look back over the last few weeks, and Christian Kirk last week, 6.5% target share, 0% the week before. Xavier Hutchinson, 3% last week. Jaylen Noel, 6%. Like it is very much just Jayden Higgins is going to be the second wide receiver option. But just there's going to be matchups where it works and matchups where it doesn't. Like last week was his first game outside the top 36 wide receivers in his last 5. Now going up against the Cardinals, they've been pretty good against the wide receiver position. They've allowed the fewest fantasy points this year. But they're a team that's really difficult to project week to week. Like they struggle at times, or they get into these high-paced games which bring about more pass attempts. I mean, both these teams rank top 7 in plays per game. So maybe that's the path to Jayden Higgins being really relevant. But yeah, I think top 36 finish is kind of what you're looking for Jayden Higgins most weeks.
And rounding out with the F tier, we got DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Adonai Mitchell, Kayshon Boutte, Darnell Mooney, Darius Slayton, Romeo Doubs, and Devon Vele. AD Mitchell had the blow-up week the week before, was terrible last week from a fantasy perspective. But yes, I was sad enough to go and watch the All-22, and I thought he looked good still getting open. I think the issue was more Brady Cook being incompetent as an NFL quarterback than Adonai Mitchell being a bad receiver. Are you willing to go back to the well potentially for a dart throw this week?
Yeah, I talked here and in the Discord in the fantasy previews, we put in the write-ups that it wasn't a great fixture on paper for AD Mitchell, but the volume that he's seen over the last couple of weeks, I mean, you're still talking 26 targets over the last 3 games. And yes, only 1 catch on 6 targets isn't great. But going up against the Jags team who like to play fast, who have had their moments where they've given up big plays, I'm fine going back to AD Mitchell.
And one player that I wanted to discuss, Tom, which I think you didn't, Devon Vele, it's happening. 93% snap share, 92% route participation rate, and 26% target share. The volume is getting there to catch up with the underlying numbers. The fantasy production hasn't quite caught up yet. But if you're buying into metrics, buying into underlying numbers, I truly believe Devon Vele is one of those that could get there. And I think there's plenty worse dart throws than him this week.
I mean, yeah, okay. That's just like he's been below 8 fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 games. I think the Saints, ever since they moved on from Shaheed, it's Chris Olave and Juwan Johnson, who are the only players over a 12% target share in this offense. And then you've got Vele, who's the clear third, but like he's competing with Mason Tipton, Dante Pettis, and Kevin Austin for wide receiver snaps. Like he should be able to beat those guys out for that, but I don't have any expectations for him. I don't trust him at any point. And I just think that looking at the guys that we've got ahead of him, like I wouldn't be surprised if you can go out and pick up Darius Slayton, Romeo Doubs, Kayshon Boutte, Darnell Mooney off waivers and just start one of those guys instead.
Tom, we're 50 wide receivers in. The people watching this video now are the sickos that are playing in start 12, start 13 leagues. They're not able to pick up guys off waiver wires this deep. I just believe, look, 93% snap share. He's already emerged as the wide receiver 2 in the offense. I think there's some hope there. But that is it. If you want to get into more debates that Tom and I have about wide receiver rankings and more, you can come join us in the Discord and listen to some ridiculous conversations about ridiculously deep fantasy options that you would not be starting in your normal leagues. Of course, hit the thumbs up on your way out and check out all of the other videos we've released this week.